So I've been getting requests to make masks, which is great, is exciting. I just wanted to take a moment to show the process of how I'm making these masks. Basically, to sort of say why I'm not rushing to open a store or sell in mass because it's quite a process. So I thought I'd break down like the process that I'm using because this is the style that I like. Part of the reason is because it involves straight cuts to design. So instead of a pattern, I'm measuring it on a board, cutting it with a handy dandy tool that's a fabric rotary cutter. So it starts with this, which is 7 inches by 9 inches. So 7 inches this way, 9 inches this way, and this would be the front. The second step is pinning a front and a back. So different pattern here. So this is inside out because the first part you're going to do it inside out. So I'm using the fabric that's the front, the pretty pattern fabric, and then I'm using a t-shirt cut up into squares for the back. Part of the reason why I decided to do this is I feel the t-shirts are more comfortable, but also to distinguish the front and the back, because I am sewing in a felty filter, and that is supposed to be facing a certain way. So when people are wearing them, I'm designing them to make sure that automatically you're going to wear it in the right direction. So you go from them pinning together front and back, and then sewing along the short edge, this short edge that's going to be the sides. So once you do that, you flip it back right side out, and you'll see there's the seam there, the seam there. Then what I'm doing is I'm actually inserting the filter fabric inside. So I cut it to this size of when it's actually sewn, the hems on the sides. And you'll see that the top and bottom are still open. Okay, those are some of the initial steps of the sewing. The next step requires having double wide folded 1/2 inch bias tape. What I do is I cut it, all of them to 40 inches total. I fold them in half and I iron them. So this is my crease so that I know where the middle is, because that is important when you're placing it on the mask. The next step is pinning the bias tape like this. The reason why you pin it like this is you're going to sew along this line here, and then you remove the pins and you're able to fold it over. So that process, let's see here. The next step is like this. So you sew this down. Now, mind you, whenever you're sewing, you're starting your stitch, you're doing a few stitches, you're reversing, then going forward again. That step is important to finish all your seams. Otherwise, things fall apart. As the Roots album can attest to, things do sometimes fall apart. So now you've got this seam here, which is that first part to attach it. Okay, the next step, I guess I could show you with this one. The next step after you do that is you're gonna fold it over, because this is why the double wide folding bias tape is fantastic, because you're gonna fold it over. Give me one sec to do that. So you're folding it over like this, over the back, and then you're gonna sew that, okay? Once you sew that, mind you, I pin the whole thing because you're gonna start from here, sew all the way. So I pin all along here so that I keep my lines, and you sew all the way down. So that is the bottom of your mask, okay? Here's where it gets even more elaborate. When I do the top part, I'm sewing it along this line, and then I'm pulling up the feet of the sewing machine and reverse sewing this line here, coming back, going back along the edge, reverse sewing this line here. That's to mark where the wire is going to go. So I actually pin it with the pins like right here, so I know to cut in inside there. And the wire that I'm inserting, it's already inserted. So I insert it, then I pin it so that it's holding the wire down, and then sew along this very, very narrow edge here. The wire that I'm using, because I'm an artsy person, I have a lot of random crafts at home. So I had this copper wire for jewelry making. So another step that's happened in making these masks is I've taken each piece of wire, I've cut it to about 4 inches, and then I'm actually taking a jewelry making tool, which of course is in the other room because I sit and watch TV and do this part, and I basically twirl the edges into a circle and then press them with another tool to make sure they're flat and it's not pokey and sharp. The reason why I'm doing this added step is because I learned the hard way, which is great about learning as you go, that if you don't put these edges in, it's just a wire. It can like basically poke its way through the material. So this is to help it to stay within the fabric and not be able to poke its way out, because now it has a wider base. So I've tucked in and sewn in the wire into here, and then the next step would be to do the same thing. You'll notice I'm tucking it inside layers of this fabric so that it's inside that, and then it's also going to be covered by this. My goal being that when you're putting this up against your nose and gently folding it to conform to your nose, there's fabric in between you and the copper wire for comfort. And then I will do now pin this and sew this all the way along like we did the bottom. So you got to be careful with the wire. And so when I sew this, I'll actually be sewing either above the wire or below the wire, generally like above, because that wire and my sewing machine needles aren't the best of friends. I've actually broken 2 needles on my sewing machine. Luckily, it came with 4 and then a couple different size extra ones. So I still have 1 more spare. I'm being more cautious. So just know when you're sewing with wire to be wary of that. And I think actually doing the circles has been helping because it goes right through that loop, hopefully. And that would be the next step, would be finishing this up. Then once that is on, the other thing that you maybe can't see, maybe you can hear on the back, is that actually once I did that second step of just doing the base sewing before I even put the filter in, I iron the fabric. And you're going to iron the fabric in half and then fold the halves so that you have these marks. These marks are going to show you how to do the crimping folds, basically, that you're gonna sew over. So basically you're gonna kind of fold it like that, and that's not as pretty as it will be. I'll do it more efficiently, but basically like that, and then you're gonna sew along this side to hold those pleats. Now, I was pinning these the first times I was doing it to hold those pleats, and I found that just added extra layers, made it more complicated to sew. So now what I do is I just hold it really firmly as I'm sewing. So I get it the way I want it, like this, and then basically hold it really firmly like so as I'm sewing, and to keep the pleats. And then you're gonna wanna go actually in the direction of the pleats this way. Because if you go this way, your sewing machine's not going to like it. And then making sure that you actually have the wire side at the top so that your pleats are going down from the wire side. Then the other steps that happen are clipping all the threads. Oh my gosh, there's so many threads that have to be clipped all along the way so that you don't get caught up. So it's cutting the fabric, it's cutting the backs, it's pinning it, initial sewing, adding the filter. So much like I have pre-cut fabric, I've pre-cut the filter, and again, it's based on the size once the seams are in, so it's going to be a little smaller than the 7x9 initial size. So I've got a stack of filters that are pre-cut, fabric pre-cut, and then now I have stacks like this that are the back and the front that I'll sew. Then I'll put the filters in, and then I'll do that process that I just showed. So it's a long, tedious thing. I've actually only completed maybe a dozen masks total, and this has been over a couple weeks. But I've prepped a lot of stuff so that the next batch will get better. I've been practicing and getting better using different tools, getting the wire in there, figuring out methods. I actually have, like, I just sat and watched TV and coiled a bunch of wires so that, I can make several masks and not have to do that same step. Generally, I do one step on several, then do the second step. And the other thing is I'm changing my thread. Once I get to the point where the thread's going to be visible like this, I've really thought about what colors I want for each design. So I actually, because I don't know, I'm strange sometimes, but because I wanted to kind of think about, okay, how much of this bias tape do I have, and what color thread. So I made these little samples of, like, okay, the front fabric, the bias tape, and the thread, just to kind of remind myself, because I'm trying to distribute the colors of thread and bias tape so that I can make the most from the spools that I have. So these are kind of like just my color palettes cards to remind me. And then I purchased bias tape in bulk online. So this is actually 55 yards of bias tape. It takes 40 inches, 80 inches of bias tape for each mask. So it's just under 25 masks with this, mathematically. Maybe 25, but the 25th one will be a little bit short. If you don't buy in bulk, what you end up with are these that are like 3 yards. And 3 yards basically makes you one mask and then gives you an awkward amount left over that you can use for other projects, but it won't work for this. So something to keep in mind is that one of these is like one mask. It's about a little over 2.5 yards or so per mask. So those are the kinds of things that I'm negotiating as I create these masks. So it's cutting, it's folding, it's ironing, it's sewing and pinning and sewing some more, and then putting in the wire and carefully sewing, and eventually and throughout the process, you got to rethread your needle, you got to change your thread, your bobbin runs out of thread, you got to redo that. So I actually started pre-prepping bobbins. So like I used this color for the series of masks that I completed, and this is the completed mask. So again, you'll see I put the burgundy thread on the black. I like colors. I like to coordinate, so that's something that's important. So having bobbins that are ready to go with different colors as I transition through different masks. My goal right now is to kind of try to make 4 or 5 of each design. But again, it's a very slow process. But I wanted to share a little bit about that process, and I'm more than happy to give more detailed information if anyone wants to try to make them themselves. I totally support that. I'm not into the whole capitalist reality of not sharing. I basically took several designs I saw online and kind of merged them together to create something that worked for me and that I liked. And I hope that you find that time or interest, if you are doing crafts, to maybe pursue your own. There are lots of different templates out there. And this, I said, I modified it because I wanted to sew in the filters because they're washable. I used washable filter material made by Filti, FILTI.com. And this is the finished with the pleats, which is its whole process of sewing those in. You'll see it's nice and finished. And then this is the top where the wire is. so you can flex it and bend it to fit you a little more snug around the nose. That process of putting in the wire, I would have to say, is my least favorite part of the process. But the one I made initially that didn't have the wire, I felt the gap, and this just feels more controlled. And as someone who wears glasses, it also helps with the steaming of the glasses. So if you have any questions, if it's something that you're interested in, let me know. I'm not here being glamorous. I'm just hanging out on a Sunday, Mother's Day, sewing, making masks, being crafty. And it's not something I intend to do for profit. I'd have to sell like over 50. I'd have to make and sell over 50 to even just break even with the expenses. Probably a little more than that. So this isn't like something that I would even pursue as a profit motive if I was going to start selling them. Maybe I could recoup some of my costs, but I'd have to be 100 masks in at least before I saw profit. But that's not including my work time. And I definitely would say I'm not making minimum wage. Once I got past paying for stuff, it still wouldn't be minimum wage because it takes a long time to make the masks. And so, again, if I can churn out a lot and get a good rhythm down and get my flow together, I've done a lot of prep work, which I'm excited about because that's the first step. And then I'll make them available to people for sale. But right now, I'm just trying to get the craft down, get the speed down, stock up a supply so that I can actually even have the option of potentially selling them or getting compensated by loved ones for gifting them masks. So just wanted to share. And like I said, I'm more than happy to be transparent about the process and things that I found helpful in it. It's a learning lesson. But sewing, there's something about that hum that I'm really thankful for in this time because it's definitely peaceful. It reminds me of time spending in the basement many hours with my great-grandmother while she sewed, and I would sew sequins and beads onto things or do random little projects as a kid, but there was that constant hum of the machine. So for me, it's really more about my own inner peace, being a little bit fashionable with masks, because even if they start lifting the masks requirements, which our county technically has, but restaurant stores are still requiring them, I plan on wearing face coverings for the rest of 2020 and possibly beyond. So I see this as a long-term lifestyle choice for myself that I think others are going to embark on. Many folks in other countries, in China, pre-coronavirus, were wearing masks for pollution in the air and just high density realities. So I feel like they were onto something. And that, I think, really contributed to why their numbers were able to potentially be more contained, because people were already in the habit of wearing face coverings and wearing masks. So, hey, I'm looking at it as a style choice. And then some people have mentioned, too, that for all the video surveillance that we're under, it also helps provide some anonymity in that regard, too. So I see it as a plus and a plus to make this fashionable, fun, as well as a self-care process of me being crafty and artsy. So again, feel free if you have questions or if you want to reach out to me, feel free to do so. Poetic License with Taria is the place to find me on Facebook, and Taria Autry on YouTube. And I'll be posting this video in various places where people find me online. I hope you are having a fabulous Mother's Day, and be safe. And hey, be well and be fashionable.